think about the last time you were just absolutely furiously angry. Like maybe someone took credit for your work in a really important meeting.
Oh, yeah. That'll do it.
Right. Or, I don't know, a driver cuts you off so dangerously on the highway that you actually have to slam on the brakes. Or someone you trusted completely breaks a core promise. What is the standard culturally accepted advice for that moment?
I mean, we're all told to just let off steam.
Exactly. Popular psychology tells us to go to the gym, absolutely destroy a punching bag. Or go into your bedroom, bury your face in a pillow, and just scream at the top of your lungs.
Call your best friend and spend like 45 minutes relentlessly venting about every single flaw of that person.
Yeah, because we are told we have to get it out of our system or we're going to explode. But what if I told you that, from a purely neurological standpoint, venting your anger like that doesn't let off steam at all? What if, neurologically, you were literally just pouring gasoline on a fire?
It's one of the most pervasive myths in modern psychology. We have this hydraulic model of human emotion.
The boiler room analogy.
Right. This idea that anger is like steam building up inside a boiler and you have to open the release valve. But the human brain just doesn't work like a steam engine.
It really doesn't, and that is exactly what we are tearing down today. Welcome to this deep dive. Whether you are prepping for a really tough negotiation, trying to navigate some extremely delicate office politics, or, you're just insanely curious about human behavior and why your own brain does the things it does, this conversation is perfectly tailored for you.
Because today, we are completely reframing how you understand anger.
Yes, based on an amazing compilation of psychological research, cultural studies, and linguistic analysis that we've been going through, we are moving far, far away from the standard cultural messaging of anger management and suppression.
Because that messaging fundamentally misunderstands what anger actually is. I mean, society tells us from a very young age that anger is unprofessional, it's destructive.
We're taught it's a weakness.
Exact. A moral failing or a lack of emotional control. Keep your cool. Don't let them see you sweat. Be the bigger person. But when you actually look at the psychology, the biology, and the evolutionary history of this emotion, you quickly realize we are pathologizing a survival mechanism.
And I'll be completely honest with you and with the listener here. I have always really struggled with my relationship with anger. For years, my default was just to swallow it.
Push it down.
Yeah. If a boundary of mine was crossed, I would just tell myself, it's fine, don't make a scene, don't be difficult. And the result was always this lingering, exhausting resentment because I completely bought into the idea that anger was inherently toxic.
Which is such a common experience.
But the goal of our deep dive today, and I really want to stress this, is not to justify toxic behavior. We are not giving anyone a free pass to, yell at a barista or throw a tantrum in traffic. Our mission is to decode the incredibly vital, life-saving information that anger is trying to hand you.
That distinction is just paramount. We really have to separate the internal emotion from the poorly regulated behaviors we usually associate with it.
Right.
Like when someone punches a wall, we blame the anger. But the anger didn't punch the wall. A lack of behavioral regulation did. So to understand this, we need to break down what anger actually is, anatomically and psychologically. It's not just a fleeting feeling. It is a highly complex, multi-component state.
Okay, let's unpack this because I think people just assume anger is one single thing. You're mad, boom. But it's actually a four-part harmony, right? Or, well, maybe a four-part disharmony.
It really is a whole system. First, you have the subjective feeling, that internal conscious recognition of I am mad. It's your brain's psychological labeling of the state.
Yeah, okay, step one.
Second, you have the physiological arousal. And this is where things get really intense. Your sympathetic nervous system just kicks into overdrive, your heart rate elevates, blood pressure spikes, your muscles physically tense up, and your adrenal glands release a massive flood of cortisol and adrenaline.
Your body is fundamentally changing its chemistry in a matter of milliseconds.
Exactly.
Which, feels awful. It's a super uncomfortable state to be in.
It's extremely uncomfortable.
Yep.
And that leads directly to the third component, which is the cognitive appraisal. This is the mental evaluation where your brain interprets the situation and decides, a wrong has been committed here and it matters to me.
And then the fourth piece.
The fourth component is the behavioral tendency. What does this intense physical and mental state compel you to do?
And this fourth component, the behavioral tendency, is where my entire perspective on this shifted. Because we usually lump fear and anger together, right?
Sure, they're both high arousal, negative states.
Yeah, bad, stressful emotions. But their behavioral tendencies are complete opposites. Fear is an avoidance motivation. I like to think of fear as the fire alarm. You hear the alarm, you realize there is danger, and your biological imperative is to evacuate the building. You run away.
To protect yourself.
Right. But anger is an approach motivation. Anger is the fire extinguisher. It makes you run toward the flames to put them out.
What's fascinating here is how unique that is. From a biological and psychological standpoint, it is incredibly rare for a negative arousal state to generate an approach motivation.
Usually we just want to hide.
Right. When we feel bad, when our stress hormones spike, our instinct is almost always to retreat. Sadness makes us withdraw. Disgust makes us recoil. Fear makes us run. But anger creates this highly uncomfortable negative state that literally forces you to step into the conflict.
You have to walk into the smoke to use the fire extinguisher. You are actively stepping into danger.
Yes. It generates the immense energetic capital and the intense psychological determination you need to address a threat head-on. It completely overrides your natural desire for safety so that you can protect something even more important.
Which begs the massive million-dollar question, why? If evolution optimizes for survival, and survival usually means avoiding danger, why did our ancestors develop a biological mechanism that floods them with stress hormones and forces them to confront danger?
Because in the ancestral environment, avoiding danger just wasn't always an option, especially for a highly social species like us. The threats our predecessors faced weren't just, predators you could run away from. The threats were often intensely social and complex.
Right. We aren't talking about getting a passive-aggressive email from someone in accounting. We are talking about existential threats within a tribal structure. If someone physically attacks you, you can't always just run away. Or resource theft.
Oh, absolutely.
If another member of the tribe is literally taking the food you gathered and you just avoid the conflict out of fear, you starve.
Starvation is a very stark reality in that context. But the threats were also abstract, yet equally lethal. Think about reputation damage. In a small hunter-gatherer community, your reputation isn't just about your ego. It is your currency.
It's everything.
If someone damages your social standing, they are damaging your ability to attract a mate, your ability to secure allies when you're sick, your ability to ensure your offspring are protected.
And reciprocity. I mean, if I go out and hunt and I share my meat with you when you have nothing, there is a social contract there. But if next week you have a successful hunt and you refuse to share with me, if I just walk away from that out of fear, the entire social fabric of the tribe breaks down. I become a permanent victim of exploitation.
Exactly. So anger evolved specifically to negotiate those relationships and enforce those boundaries. It functions as a highly sophisticated, built-in deterrent system. Evolutionary psychologists break down the purpose of anger into 4 distinct functions, and the first one is signaling.
Which is brilliant because it's all about avoiding the actual fight.
Precisely.
Yeah.
In the natural world, a physical fight is the absolute worst-case scenario.
Yeah.
It is incredibly costly. Even if you are the dominant party and you win the fight, you might get a scratch. And without modern antibiotics, that scratch gets infected and you die.
So fighting is always a bad idea.
The evolutionary preference is always to win the conflict without coming to blows.
So the visible expression of anger is essentially a negotiation tactic. The raised voice, the flushed face, the furrowed brow, puffing out your chest. You are signaling to the person who took your resources, you have crossed a boundary, and if you take one more step, there is going to be a severe physical cost to you.
It's deterrence. You are projecting a credible threat of retaliation to alter the other person's cost-benefit analysis. Often, just the signal is enough to achieve the corrective effect. The offender backs down, the boundary is reestablished, and both parties survive because nobody actually had to throw a punch.
But what if the signal doesn't work? What if the person stealing your food calls your bluff? That's where the second evolutionary function comes in, right? Energizing.
This is where that massive physiological arousal pays off. If deterrence fails, and you are forced into an intense physical confrontation, or even just a prolonged high-stakes social negotiation, your body needs to be ready.
Hence the adrenaline.
That flood of cortisol and adrenaline, the increase in blood flow to your large muscle groups, that is your body abandoning all long-term metabolic processes like digestion to give you immediate explosive energy to defend your boundaries.
Your body is literally preparing for war. But the third function is the one that really stopped me in my tracks.
Yeah.
Because it's not external at all, it's internal. The third function of anger is clarifying values.
Yeah, it acts as an internal compass. This is the cognitive appraisal component, working as a diagnostic tool for your own psychology. We are actually very bad at consciously knowing what our core values are until they are violated.
Oh, wow, that is so true.
If a boundary is crossed and you feel nothing, or just a mild annoyance, your biology is telling you that boundary wasn't actually that important to your survival or your identity. But if an event occurs and you feel that sudden, undeniable surge of physiological anger,
That heat in your chest.
right, your body is effectively sending a flare-up into your conscious mind saying, pay attention. This matters. This is a core value, a core resource, or a fundamental relationship that is vital to who you are.
It tells you what you truly care about. And once it tells you what you care about, it gives you the fuel to protect it over the long haul. Which brings us to the fourth function, motivating sustained action. I was reading about the half-life of different emotions, and fear is relatively quick. You see a snake, your fear spikes, you jump back, the snake slithers away, and within a few minutes, your heart rate starts to settle. The fear subsides because you are safe. But anger lingers. It outlasts fear by a massive margin.
Because resolving a boundary violation is rarely as simple as just stepping away from a snake. If someone in your community has systematically exploited your reciprocity, you don't just need quick energy to yell at them. You need sustained motivation to either get your resources back, renegotiate the entire social contract, or build a coalition within the tribe to ostracize them.
That takes time.
That kind of complex social remediation takes a lot of time. It requires enduring focus. Anger provides the slow, steady burn of motivation required to stay engaged in a difficult, uncomfortable conflict until a new, fair equilibrium is reached.
I really want you, the listener, to absorb this. The next time you are sitting in a meeting and a colleague blatantly talks over you and steals your idea and you feel that heart rate spike, realize that your body is not malfunctioning. It is not trying to ruin your day. It is anciently wiring you to negotiate a social boundary. It is giving you the energy to protect your status.
It's doing exactly what it was designed to do.
Yes. But that brings up a really fascinating paradox. If we all have this identical evolutionary hardware, if we are all wired with the same biological fire extinguisher, why do our triggers look so completely different? Like, think about being at the airport. A flight gets canceled. One person at the gate immediately turns red, starts screaming at the gate agent, demanding a manager, absolutely losing their mind. Another person sitting right next to them on the exact same canceled flight just lets out a heavy sigh, pulls out a paperback book, and starts reading. Same exact stimulus, totally different emotional response. Why?
Because while the hardware is universal, the software is highly individualized. And to understand the software, we have to look at the work of psychologist Richard Lazarus and the cognitive appraisal model of emotion.
This is huge.
It fundamentally changed how we understand human reactions.
Yeah.
Prior to this, the general belief was largely based on strict behaviorism, that a stimulus directly causes a response.
Yeah.
The canceled flight directly causes the anger.
A equals B. Simple.
Exactly. But Lazarus demonstrated that the event itself is emotionally inert. It is not the canceled flight that triggers the anger. It is the mind's rapid, often subconscious evaluation of the canceled flight, the appraisal.
So my brain is acting as a filter between the event and my emotional reaction.
Yes. And for anger to be triggered specifically, Lazarus identified 3 specific criteria that must be met in your appraisal. If any one of these 3 ingredients is missing, you might feel sadness, you might feel anxiety, you might feel profound disappointment, but you will not feel the specific mobilizing emotion of anger.
Okay, let's walk through this recipe for anger because this explains so much about our daily lives. The first required component is a perceived wrong or injustice.
Something has to occur that violates a standard you hold. An obligation wasn't met, a norm of fairness was broken, or you were treated in a way that falls below a baseline of respect. There has to be an offense.
Okay, that makes sense. But the second component is the one that really clicked for me. The wrong has to be attributed to a blameworthy agent.
This is the crux of anger. The violation must be attributed to an entity that had the capacity to choose otherwise, but actively chose to commit the wrong. It requires moral agency.
I was trying to think of a way to visualize this. Imagine a massive hurricane comes through, right? And a tree falls on my house and just crushes my living room. The roof is caved in, my furniture is ruined. In that moment, I am devastated. I am overwhelmed with stress. I might be terrified, but I am not angry at the tree.
Right, of course not.
And I'm not angry at the wind. I can't stand in my ruined living room and scream at the sky, demanding an apology from the weather because the storm is not a moral agent. It didn't wake up and choose to target me.
Exactly. But let's change the scenario slightly. Let's say it's a totally sunny day, and you find out that the roofer you hired and paid thousands of dollars to just a month ago, used incredibly cheap, substandard materials, and completely cut corners to save money. And because of that, a mild rainstorm causes your roof to collapse and ruin your living room.
Ah, I'd lose my mind.
The physical damage is identical. The financial cost is identical. The inconvenience is identical. But your emotional state is completely different. You are absolutely furious.
I'm seeing red. Because the blame shifts from an unthinking force of nature to a human being who made a conscious choice to exploit me.
Yes. The attribution of choice transforms stress into anger. And this explains so many modern frustrations.
It totally explains customer service. Think about calling a massive telecom company. When I get stuck in one of those endless automated phone tree menus, press 4 for billing, press 7 to hear these options again, I hate it. It's frustrating. But I don't feel intense targeted anger toward the robot voice.
Because it's just a robot.
Right. But the second I finally get connected to a human representative and that human tells me, I'm sorry, I cannot refund that charge, my blood pressure skyrockets. I am furious, even though both the robot and the human were equally unhelpful.
Because your cognitive appraisal recognizes the human as a blameworthy agent. The automated system is just lines of code. It has no agency. But the human being on the other end of the line possesses agency. Your brain rapidly calculates, this person has the power to solve my problem, and they are actively choosing not to. Now, intellectually, you might know their hands are tied by strict corporate policy, but on a subconscious appraisal level, your brain registers a moral agent denying you resources. Thus, the fire extinguisher is deployed.
Wow. It's so automatic. Okay, so we have a perceived wrong, and we have a blameworthy agent. The third necessary component of Lazarus's model is personal relevance.
The injustice has to matter to your specific world. It must impact your interests, your well-being, your core values, or the well-being of your in-group. If you read a news story about a minor zoning dispute in a small town on a different continent, you recognize a conflict. You might even identify a blameworthy agent, but it lacks personal relevance. You don't get angry. But if that exact same zoning dispute is proposed for the empty lot right next to your house, suddenly it threatens your property value and your peace and quiet. The personal relevance is extremely high, and the anger ignites.
But this is where the human brain does something almost magical, I think, because our personal relevance isn't just limited to our physical property or our immediate survival. The research talks about this concept of moral imagination. Because I don't just get angry about things that happen to me. I can read a history book about an injustice that occurred 200 years before I was born to people I have no relation to, and I can feel genuine, visceral anger.
Absolutely.
Or I can watch a movie, see a fictional character being betrayed, and feel my heart rate spike. How is that possible if it's not personally relevant to my actual physical life?
This is a testament to the evolutionary expansion of human empathy and our abstract sense of justice. Through moral imagination, our cognitive appraisal process extends personal relevance beyond mere physical survival to include our deeply held ideological values. When we see a fictional character being betrayed, our appraisal process registers a violation of a norm, loyalty, an agent who is blameworthy of the traitor, and a personal stake in the abstract concept of fairness.
So even though I'm safe on my couch,
You are not physically threatened, but your values are threatened. And because your brain appraises your values as an extension of your identity, it generates real physiological anger to defend them.
that is profound. It means our anger is fundamentally tied to our morality. So we now have this deeply detailed picture of how anger is triggered internally. We have the evolutionary biology driving the arousal and the cognitive appraisal directing it. But we don't live in a vacuum. We live in a society. And how we experience anger internally is heavily policed by how the external world judges our expression of it.
And this is where the biology crashes headfirst into sociology, because the way society evaluates the expression of anger is drastically unequal. There is a massive systemic double standard regarding who is actually permitted to wield this evolutionary fire extinguisher.
And the most consistently documented fault line for this double standard is gender.
Absolutely. The research on this is staggering, and it highlights how cultural conditioning overrides biological equity. To illustrate this, we have to look at the groundbreaking work of researchers like Victoria Breskel at Yale University. She conducted incredibly detailed studies examining how the expression of anger impacts status and perceived competence in the workplace, specifically among executives.
Let's really dig into how this study was set up, because the methodology makes the results so undeniable.
The experimental design is quite elegant. Breskel and her team essentially created scenarios where participants evaluated fictitious executives. They were given videos or transcripts of a scenario where an executive, let's call it an objective professional, loses an important account or faces a major setback, and the executive responds by expressing anger.
And we were talking about a professional expression of anger, right? They aren't throwing chairs through windows. They're expressing clear, forceful frustration about the lost account.
Correct. It is contextually appropriate professional anger. Now, when the participants evaluated a male executive expressing this anger, the results were overwhelmingly positive. The male executives were rewarded with higher status attributions. The evaluators viewed them as powerful, highly competent, passionate, and deeply invested in the company's success.
Wow.
Their anger was seen as a sign of strong leadership. They were perceived as commanding respect.
The exact evolutionary signaling working perfectly. He puffed up his chest, and the tribe respected him more. But then they ran the exact same experiment with the exact same scenario, the exact same script of anger, but the executive was female.
And the evaluation completely inverted. When female executives expressed the exact same anger in the identical context, they were heavily penalized. They received significantly lower status attributions. They were not seen as passionate leaders. They were viewed as unstable, overly aggressive, and lacking emotional control. Their competence was immediately questioned.
It's the exact same emotion, the exact same words.
It gets worse. In these evaluations, the female executives who expressed anger were actually rated lower in status and competence than male executives who didn't express any emotion at all. And significantly, the evaluators tended to attribute the man's anger to external circumstances. He is angry because the situation is bad, but they attributed the woman's anger to internal character flaws. She is angry because she is an angry, unstable person.
The fundamental attribution error, just totally weaponized by gender. So what does this all mean? If we look at the real-world impact of this, think about the compound cost this places on women in the workplace. If a female professional is in a meeting and a clear boundary is crossed, someone condescends to her or steals her project, her evolutionary hardware, her cognitive appraisal, is functioning perfectly. Her body floods with cortisol, the fire extinguisher is handed to her, and she is biologically motivated to correct the injustice.
Right.
But because of this social double standard, she instantly knows that if she uses the fire extinguisher, she will be professionally penalized.
She is caught in an impossible bind. If she expresses the anger to solve the problem, she loses status.
Oh.
So she is heavily incentivized to suppress it.
And suppressing it carries a massive dual cost. First, she suffers the physiological toll of bottling up a highly energized arousal state, which we know is exhausting and terrible for long-term health. And second, the original injustice remains unaddressed. The person who stole the project gets away with it. The boundary remains undefended. She pays the price twice.
It is a profound systemic inefficiency, let alone an injustice. But it is crucial that we examine a vital caveat the research provides here, because when we discuss gender differences in emotion, people often default to biological essentialism. They assume men and women are just wired differently.
Right, the boys will be boys argument.
Exactly. But Bruscole's work and the broader anthropological data proves that this double standard is entirely socially constructed.
How did they prove that it's not biological?
By looking cross-culturally. When researchers examine cultures with highly egalitarian gender norms, or cultures that generally discourage emotional expression universally regardless of gender, this differential penalty shrinks or disappears entirely.
Interesting.
If it were biological, it would be universal across all human populations. The fact that the penalty varies based on cultural norms proves that the way we judge anger expression is a learned behavior. It is a societal script, not biological destiny.
We are just conditioned to accept men's anger as authority and women's anger as pathology. And looking at this objectively, just evaluating the sociological data, it's clear how much friction this creates in organizations and personal relationships.
And given these severe social penalties, whether based on gender or just the general professional taboo against anger in corporate settings, it makes perfect sense that people are desperately seeking ways to manage and regulate their anger. Nobody wants to blow up their career or alienate their friends.
Which brings us back to the hook we started with. Because people are trying to manage their anger, they turn to the most popular, culturally ubiquitous advice available. And that advice is spectacularly, dangerously wrong.
The catharsis theory, the venting myth.
Let's really dive into this because this affects literally everyone. The idea of catharsis comes from this hydraulic model of emotion we mentioned earlier. It's the idea that anger is this pressurized substance in your body. If your boss yells at you, pressure builds. If you get a flat tire, pressure builds. And if you don't blow off steam, if you don't punch a pillow or go to a rage room and smash plates or rant to your partner for an hour, the pressure will cause the boiler to explode in a dangerous way.
It is incredibly intuitive. It makes perfect metaphorical sense. The problem is, human neurology is not a plumbing system. And the definitive research dismantling this myth comes from Brad Bushman and his colleagues at Ohio State University. Bushman spent decades studying catharsis and aggression, and his findings completely overturned popular psychology.
Walk us through the methodology of Bushman's research, because I think hearing how they prove this is fascinating.
In classic Bushman studies, they would take a group of participants, usually college students, and intentionally make them angry. They would have the students write an essay on a controversial topic, and then a confederate of the researchers would give them highly insulting, degrading feedback on their writing. This is the worst essay I've ever read. You sound uneducated, that sort of thing.
Ouch. So the cognitive appraisal fires up. Perceived wrong, blameworthy agent, high personal relevance regarding their intelligence. They are genuinely angry.
Exactly. Then they divide the angry students into groups. One group is told to sit quietly and wait. Another group is taken into a room with a punching bag and told to hit the bag as hard as they can while thinking about the person who just insulted them. They are explicitly told to vent their anger.
The classic let-off steam intervention.
Yes. And afterward, they measure the participants' anger levels, both through self-reporting and by giving them an opportunity to retaliate against the person who insulted them, usually by blasting them with a really loud noise. According to the hydraulic model, the group that hit the punching bag should have released their anger and therefore be calmer and less punitive.
That's what we expect.
But the results showed the exact opposite.
The group that hit the punching bag was angrier.
Significantly angrier. They reported higher levels of internal anger, and they were much more aggressive when given the chance to retaliate. Bushman's conclusion was clear. Venting anger by acting aggressively doesn't reduce anger. It rehearses it.
Rehearses it. That is such a powerful word.
When you punch a pillow while thinking about your terrible boss, or when you pace around your kitchen ranting to your roommate, recounting every single unfair detail of what happened that day, you are not discharging the emotion. You are actively keeping your sympathetic nervous system engaged. You are maintaining the high heart rate and the cortisol flow. And crucially, you are repeatedly reinforcing the cognitive appraisal that you were wronged. You are deepening the neural pathways of the anger.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. I was trying to come up with a way to explain this, and I realized it is exactly like scratching a mosquito bite.
Well, that's a good comparison.
When you get a mosquito bite, the urge to scratch it is overwhelming. And when you first scratch it for about 3 seconds, it feels amazing. It feels like profound relief. But what are you actually doing? You are aggravating the tissue, you are causing your body to release more histamines to the area, and you are ensuring that the bite will be 10 times itchier and more inflamed 5 minutes from now.
That is a phenomenal analogy. Venting feels validating in the short term. When you rant to a friend and they say, wow, you are so right, your boss is a monster, it feels good to be validated. The scratching feels good. But neurologically, you are just releasing more emotional histamines. You are expanding the inflammation.
But wait, we also have to be careful here, because if venting is bad, the logical alternative seems to be suppression. Just swallow it, smile, and pretend you aren't mad. But earlier we said suppression is terrible for you.
It is. Chronic suppression is the other extreme, and it is physiologically devastating. If you constantly experience the arousal of anger but artificially suppress the behavioral expression, your body remains flooded with stress hormones but has no outlet. Long-term studies associate chronic anger suppression with elevated blood pressure, compromised immune function, and significantly increased risk of cardiovascular disease. You are essentially letting battery acid sit in your veins.
So we are completely trapped. Venting amplifies the fire, and suppression burns us from the inside out. What is the actual scientifically valid way to regulate this emotion?
This is where we move from theory to a highly practical toolkit. The research outlines 4 distinct evidence-based interventions for regulating anger that actually work.
Let's go through these in detail. The first one is distraction.
Distraction is a short-term acute intervention. When your physiological arousal is peaking, when you are at a 9 or a 10 on the anger scale, the prefrontal cortex of your brain, the logical reasoning part, is essentially offline. You cannot think rationally. Your only goal in that moment is to bring the physical arousal down.
You have to stop scratching the mosquito bite.
Exactly. And the best way to do that is to forcefully shift your attention away from the source of the anger. Engage in an activity that requires cognitive focus, but is entirely unrelated to the conflict. Do a crossword puzzle. Play a fast-paced video game. Read a chapter of a dense book. By occupying your working memory with something else, you starve the cognitive appraisal of attention. You stop rehearsing the wrong, which allows your parasympathetic nervous system to kick in and slowly bring your heart rate and cortisol levels back to baseline.
It's basically the adult version of a timeout. You aren't solving the problem yet. You are just getting your body out of the red zone. Okay, intervention number 2 is cognitive reappraisal.
This goes directly back to Lazarus. If anger is generated by your interpretation of an event, you can de-escalate the anger by consciously changing that interpretation. Once you have used distraction to calm down enough to think clearly, you interrogate your own narrative.
How do you do that in practice?
By asking alternative questions. Did that driver cut me off because they are a malicious agent trying to disrespect me? Or is it possible they are having a medical emergency and rushing to the hospital? Is my coworker intentionally ignoring my emails to sabotage me? Or are they just incredibly disorganized and overwhelmed? You challenge the blameworthy agent requirement. You try to view the situation from a third-party perspective. Even if you conclude they are blameworthy, just a cognitive exercise of reappraisal significantly lowers the emotional intensity.
You are hacking the software. I love that. Okay, intervention number 3 is problem solving. And this seems so straightforward, but we almost never do it.
Because it's difficult. But if the evolutionary purpose of anger is to motivate you to address a boundary violation, then the most logically satisfying way to resolve the emotion is to actually fix the boundary violation.
Let the fire extinguisher put out the fire.
Precisely. If your anger is justified and a wrong has occurred, don't vent about it to a third party. Address it directly with the person involved. Have the difficult conversation. Negotiate the new boundary. When the brain perceives that the threat to its resources or status has been neutralized through problem solving, it naturally shuts off the anger response. The mission is accomplished.
And the 4th intervention is physical activity. But we need to clarify this, because earlier we said hitting a punching bag makes you angrier. So why is physical activity on the approved list? What is the difference between hitting a punching bag and going for a run?
The crucial difference is the cognitive association during the activity. When Bushman's subjects hit the punching bag, they were instructed to ruminate on the person who insulted them. They paired intense physical exertion with the angry narrative. That is rehearsal. But if you go for a brisk run or ride a bicycle or lift weights without focusing on the conflict, maybe you listen to an audiobook or a podcast about science, you are utilizing the physical activity purely as a biological discharge mechanism.
You are burning off the cortisol and adrenaline that the anger dumped into your bloodstream, but you aren't feeding the mental fire.
Exactly. You are metabolizing the stress hormones while giving your mind a distraction.
So if we put this together into a real-world scenario for you listening, you have a terrible, unfair day at work. Your boss blames you for their mistake. Instead of immediately calling your partner to rant for an hour, which is venting and rehearsing, you go to the gym and run on the treadmill while listening to music. That's physical activity and distraction. By the time you get home, your physiological arousal is down. That evening, you use cognitive reappraisal to plan out exactly what happened objectively. And the next morning, you use problem solving to walk into your boss's office and professionally set the record straight.
That is a masterclass in emotional regulation. It completely shifts anger from a destructive, uncontrolled force into a highly organized, productive tool. And when you realize that anger can be used this effectively for problem solving on a personal level, you start to see how it scales up.
Right. This is where the conversation expands beyond our individual lives.
Yeah.
Because when you scale up this organized, regulated problem solving, you transition from personal boundary defense to massive societal force. You get the moral and political power of anger.
If you look at the trajectory of human history, it becomes blindingly obvious that anger is the primary motivational fuel for systemic progress. We like to sanitize history and imagine that progress happens because people politely ask for change. But that is rarely the case.
Never the case. Look at the major social justice movements, the abolitionist movement to end slavery, the suffragette movement for women's right to vote, the labor movement fighting for safe working conditions and the weekend, the civil rights movement, and contemporary movements for racial justice, gender equality, and climate action. The foundational emotion driving the people in the streets was not mild preference. It wasn't polite disagreement.
It was righteous indignation. These movements were built by people who experienced or witnessed profound systemic boundary violations. They recognized a clear injustice. They identified blameworthy agents, whether that was a specific institution, a government, or a legal system. And they utilized the immense, sustained energy of anger to confront those powerful entities.
They needed the fire extinguisher on a macro level. The danger of confronting the state, where the status quo was incredibly high. Fear would have told them to stay home, to accept the oppression, to ensure their immediate physical safety. Anger provided the approach motivation necessary to step into the danger, endure the batons and the jail cells, and force a new social contract.
To truly grasp the moral weight of this, we have to look back to classical philosophy. The philosopher Aristotle offered a definition of anger that is still profoundly relevant. He defined anger as the desire to return pain for pain that is believed to be unjust.
Unjust, that is the operative word.
It is the linchpin of the moral evaluation of anger. Not all anger is created equal on a moral level.
How?
We have to draw a sharp distinction between justified anger, which is directed at genuine injustice and oppression, and unjustified anger, which often merely expresses frustration, thwarted desires, or a challenge to unwarranted privilege.
This requires us to look very closely at the power dynamics involved in the appraisal process. If we connect this to the bigger picture, there is a fundamental difference between the anger of a historically marginalized group fighting for basic human dignity and the anger of a historically powerful group furious that their exclusive entitlements are being challenged.
Right. This is an analytical framework used to evaluate the function of anger in society. It's an exercise in profound emotional intelligence and objective analysis. When evaluating a societal movement or even a personal conflict, we have to ask, is this anger rooted in a violation of universal norms of fairness and human rights? Or is it rooted in a loss of dominance?
But I have to push back here, or at least point out how incredibly difficult this is in practice. Because theoretically, evaluating whether anger is rooted in dignity versus entitlement makes sense. But human beings are not objective creatures. When I am angry, when my adrenaline is pumping, my cognitive appraisal always, 100% of the time, tells me that I am the victim of an injustice. My brain is literally wired to convince me that my anger is the righteous, justified kind. How on earth do we objectively tell the difference in the heat of the moment?
That is the hardest question in emotional regulation. And the honest answer is that in the heat of the moment, you often cannot. Your biological arousal prevents objective analysis. It requires a rigorous, almost painful level of post-event self-awareness. It means applying that cognitive reappraisal not just to calm yourself down, but to ruthlessly interrogate your own motives.
You have to play devil's advocate against your own ego.
Exactly. You have to ask yourself the deeply uncomfortable questions. Am I angry because the universal standard of fairness was actually broken? Or am I just angry because I didn't get my way? Am I angry because my fundamental dignity was attacked? Or am I angry because I lost an advantage that I felt entitled to but didn't actually earn? Mastering that distinction, being willing to admit when your anger is merely bruised ego rather than righteous indignation, is the absolute pinnacle of emotional maturity.
It requires stepping completely outside of yourself. But let's assume you do the work. You get angry, you use distraction to calm down, you reappraise the situation, and you objectively determine that your anger is justified. A clear, unfair boundary violation occurred, and you need to use problem solving to address it. How do you actually communicate that? Because standing face-to-face with the person who crossed the line is terrifying, and it usually devolves into a screaming match.
This is where we transition from theory to a highly actionable, practical toolkit. How do you express this high-stakes, volatile emotion effectively without causing the other person to become defensive and without destroying the relationship?
There is a highly specific 4-part template for expressing anger that is specifically geared towards standard Western English-speaking professional and personal contexts. I love this template because it is so concrete. It's like a cheat code for conflict resolution. Let's walk through it step by step, comparing the default wrong way we usually handle things with the right way this template suggests.
Step 1 is to name the feeling.
So the wrong way to do this is what we call performing the anger. This is what most of us do. We slam the laptop shut, we give our partner the silent treatment, we sigh heavily, we roll our eyes, or we use a harsh, biting, sarcastic tone of voice. We perform the emotion, making the other person guess exactly what is wrong. The right way, according to the template, is to explicitly and verbally name the emotion. I'm angry about what happened this morning, or I'm feeling very frustrated right now.
The psychology behind this first step is vital. When you perform anger without explicitly naming it, the other person's brain registers a threat. They know you are mad, but the threat is ambiguous. And the human brain hates ambiguity. Ambiguity spikes anxiety, and anxiety instantly triggers defensiveness. When you explicitly name the feeling, you remove the ambiguity. You create a shared objective reference point. Furthermore, it signals profound self-awareness. You are demonstrating that you are observing your emotion, you are in control of it, and you are not just being blindly driven by it.
It brings the temperature down immediately. Okay, step 2. Identify the specific behavior. The wrong way is what we almost always default to. Attacking identity. You are so disrespectful. You are incredibly selfish. You're always so thoughtless. The right way is focusing purely on the physical action. I felt dismissed when you interrupted me while I was presenting the data.
This is all about navigating the other person's defensive barriers. If you attack someone's core identity, if you call them a selfish person, their biological response is to defend their existence. They will fight back, they will deflect, and they will attack your identity in return. You are now in a fight, not a negotiation. But if you identify a specific, objective behavior, you interrupted me, you're presenting a verifiable fact. It removes the existential threat to their ego, which is the only way they will actually be able to hear the rest of what you were saying.
So you separate the action from the person. Step 3 is state the impact. The wrong way is just leaving it as a general expression of displeasure. I didn't like that you did that. The right way is connecting their behavior to a tangible consequence. When you committed to delivering the report by Thursday and you missed the deadline, I had to go into the client meeting completely unprepared, which damaged my credibility and our team's reputation.
Stating the impact connects the behavior to reality. It explains why the behavior matters. It proves that you are not just arbitrarily mad or being overly sensitive. It demonstrates that their action had a real-world cost. It appeals to their rationality and their sense of fairness, rather than just demanding they care about your feelings.
And the final step, step 4, identify the need. The wrong way is just airing the grievance and leaving it hanging in the air, expecting them to magically figure out how to fix it, or expecting them to just grovel. The right way is giving them a clear, actionable path forward.
Going forward, I need you to let me know at least 24 hours in advance if a deadline is at risk.
This brings the entire 4-step process back to the evolutionary purpose of anger we discussed at the very beginning: problem solving. If anger exists to negotiate a new boundary, you have to explicitly state what the new boundary is. It gives the other person something specific and concrete to do differently, which provides a path out of the conflict. So to put it all together, the full formula is feeling plus behavior plus impact plus need. I am frustrated. That's the feeling that you interrupted me with the client. That's the behavior, because it made our team look unaligned and unprepared. That's the impact. Going forward, I need us to agree on who leads the pitch before we walk into the room. That's the need.
It is a masterful way to navigate high-stakes conflict. It communicates everything your evolutionary hardware demands you communicate, but it packages it in a way that bypasses the other person's defensive software.
I'm directly challenging you, the listener, to try this. Seriously. The next time you need to confront a roommate about leaving a mess, or a colleague about a missed email, write it down on a Post-it note first if you have to. Feeling, behavior, impact, need. It completely strips the toxicity out of the confrontation and turns it into a productive negotiation.
It is highly effective.
Yeah.
However, as with everything involving human communication, context is king. We must introduce a massive, flashing warning sign here. This 4-part template is designed specifically for standard Western, particularly American, professional environments.
Yes. Because if you take this exact, highly direct, hyper-explicit phrasing across international borders, or even into different regional cultures, it might not solve the conflict. It might ignite an absolute disaster. Which brings us to the fascinating realm of anger across cultures.
The norms governing how, when, and to whom you can express anger vary wildly across the globe. What is considered emotionally intelligent, transparent, and productive in one culture can be perceived as deeply offensive, humiliating, or hopelessly vague in another.
Let's contrast a few distinct cultural frameworks from the sources to show how different this gets. We just discussed the American professional culture, which values directness. Saying "I am frustrated" is seen as a good thing, it's honest. But let's look at East Asian professional culture, particularly in Japan.
In many East Asian corporate and social environments, the explicit verbal expression of negative emotion, especially anger, is heavily discouraged. Harmony, or wa, is prioritized. Direct confrontation is seen as a failure of emotional control and a disruption of group cohesion. But that absolutely does not mean the anger doesn't exist or that boundaries aren't defended. It is just communicated through high-context, nonverbal signals.
So how do you know if a colleague in Tokyo is furious with you if they won't explicitly say, "I am frustrated"?
You have to read the context. The anger is managed through strategic silence, noticeable physical distance, or, very commonly, subtle shifts into much more formal language registers.
Right, so instead of using the feeling plus behavior template, a Japanese colleague might suddenly start using highly formal, distant honorifics with you when they previously used casual language, or they might become noticeably silent during a key moment in a negotiation. If you are an American sitting there waiting for them to explicitly state their impact and need, you are going to completely miss the fact that they are furious.
You are misreading the diagnostic X-ray. You are assuming a lack of verbal conflict means agreement, when in fact, the shift to formal language is a screaming siren in that cultural context. Then, on a completely different end of the spectrum, we have the famous British understatement.
Oh, this one is so dangerous for Americans because we share a language, so we just assume we share a communication style, but we absolutely do not.
British communication norms often rely heavily on understatement and irony to manage negative emotions. Anger is scaled down linguistically to maintain politeness, even if the internal physiological arousal, the cortisol and adrenaline, is identical to an American's.
So a British professional in a crisis might say, well, I'm rather disappointed with this outcome, or this situation is slightly problematic.
Precisely. And an American hears rather disappointed and translates that through an American cultural lens. The American thinks, oh, thank goodness, they're only a little bit bummed out. This is a minor issue. We can fix this next week.
But what the American doesn't realize is that I am rather disappointed. In a London boardroom can pack the exact same emotional intensity and professional consequence as an American in a New York boardroom screaming, I am absolutely furious and heads are going to roll.
It is the exact same level of anger, cloaked in a different linguistic register. If you are not calibrated to that cultural understatement, you will profoundly miscalculate the severity of the situation and likely lose the business relationship.
And finally, let's look at a totally different framework, cultures of honor. This includes regions like the American South, various Mediterranean cultures, and many Middle Eastern societies. How does anger function there?
In a culture of honor, personal, family, and group reputation is paramount. Anthropologists trace this back to historical environments where law enforcement or central authority was weak or absent. In those environments, your reputation for not being trifled with was your literal only protection against exploitation. Therefore, affronts to personal honor such as public insults, disrespect, or questioning someone's integrity are not minor annoyances, they are existential threats.
So the response to those threats has to be proportional.
Exactly. In these cultures, defending one's honor demands a highly specific, intense, and often public display of anger. It is socially required to show that you will fiercely defend your reputation.
And if you are an outsider, say you are a business person from a very low context direct culture, and you witness this intense public anger response over what you perceive as a minor slight, you might think, wow, that person is completely unhinged. What an extreme overreaction. But you are completely misunderstanding the cultural stakes.
This raises an important question about cultural competence. You are judging their survival mechanism through the lens of your own culture's safety. For anyone navigating international environments or even just highly diverse domestic environments, misreading these anger signals isn't just a simple linguistic error. It is a profound social and professional failure. You cannot take the American four-step blueprint, apply it to a high-honor culture context in the Middle East or a high-context environment in Japan and expect it to resolve the conflict.
It's like bringing a hammer to a surgery. You have to understand the environment you are operating in.
Emotional intelligence requires cultural intelligence.
Well, we have covered an immense amount of ground today, and I feel like we have genuinely rewritten the instruction manual on this emotion. Let's take a quick moment to look back at the journey we've just been on. We started by discarding the heavy, pathologizing stigma of anger management, this idea that anger is just a toxic waste spill in your brain that needs to be cleaned up and hidden away. Instead, we embraced its true evolutionary purpose. Anger is our built-in fire extinguisher. It's a highly sophisticated mechanism designed to signal boundaries, energize us for conflict, clarify our deepest values, and motivate us to sustain action.
We unpacked Lazarus's cognitive appraisal model, realizing that the event doesn't cause the anger. It is our mind's evaluation of the event perceiving a wrong, attributing it to a blameworthy moral agent, and finding personal relevance that actually pulls the pin on the emotion.
We navigated the harsh, deeply unfair realities of the gender double standard. We explored Breskel's research, recognizing the compound costs imposed on women who are severely penalized for expressing the exact same professional anger that men are rewarded and promoted for.
We completely shattered the venting myth, replacing the outdated, dangerous hydraulic model of letting off steam with Brad Bushman's research. We now know that venting just rehearses the anger, and we replaced it with evidence-based regulation techniques: distraction, cognitive reappraisal, problem-solving, and non-ruminative physical activity.
We explored how righteous indignation, as defined by Aristotle, serves as the moral fuel for massive, necessary social change. We laid out a highly practical four-step template for communicating anger effectively: feeling, behavior, impact, need, while keeping a very close eye on the complex cultural nuances that dictate how those expressions are received from Tokyo to London to the American South.
It is a fundamentally different, infinitely more empowering way of viewing an emotion that governs so much of our internal and external lives.
It really is. It changes everything. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final thought to mull over, something that builds on everything we've talked about today, especially that cognitive appraisal model. If our anger is triggered by our perception of a wrong, our belief in a blameworthy agent, and our sense of personal relevance, how is the modern digital age affecting this delicate biological machinery?
It's a vital question. We are living in an era where social media algorithms are specifically scientifically designed to maximize engagement, and the data shows that nothing drives engagement quite like moral outrage.
Exactly. These platforms are essentially outrage machines. They provide a continuous, endless stream of out-of-context wrongs, perfectly packaged with easily identifiable, blameworthy agents. And they artificially expand our sense of personal relevance until we feel like every single injustice happening anywhere on the planet is a direct threat to our own immediate existence.
It is a profound neurological vulnerability. The algorithm is artificially hacking our cognitive appraisal system. It is hijacking our evolutionary approach motivation, not to help us solve real-world problems or negotiate actual tribal boundaries, but simply to keep our thumbs scrolling and our eyes on advertisements.
So are we losing our ability to accurately appraise what is genuinely personally relevant to our actual physical lives? If these algorithms are constantly pulling the pin on our emotional fire extinguishers 100 times a day for things that don't actually threaten our real-world boundaries, what happens when a real fire starts? How do we reclaim our cognitive appraisal? How do we ensure that when our core values or our loved ones are truly threatened, our biological fire extinguisher isn't already empty, exhausted by 1,000 digital false alarms? Keep that in mind the next time you feel that surge of heat in your chest when you open your phone. Protect your energy, protect your fire extinguisher. Until next time, keep diving deep.